Ladies and gentlemen, we are ahead of our schedule slightly, so there will be time for you to break off and go to cocktails a little bit earlier. So given that it is a long weekend here in South Africa, Monday is a public holiday, and of course it is Friday, perhaps that will be well received by many of you just before we wrap up the program today. Our next conversation is an interesting one that I think will raised a lot of keen interest for many of you to actually see and understand how this development has not only come about but really fostered itself into a hive of activity for young, dynamic entrepreneurs, those who like shared office spaces, and of course look for mixed-use developments through the residential offering that it also has, and of course the vibrancy and entertainment that it brings about. Ask any millennial in South Africa or Johannesburg specifically about Maboneng, and you'll get a resounding and thrilling response. But to hear more about this particular development, how it's come about, how it addresses some of the concerns regarding reinvestment and redevelopment in the CBD. We're going to get an insightful analysis now, ladies and gentlemen, into Maboneng as a case study for us to look into. The Maboneng precinct. Please warmly welcome on stage Camilla Ripning. She represents the Maboneng precinct and will give us further details about this particular establishment and, of course, the reinvigoration that it's encouraged within the Johannesburg Central Business District. Again, you're more than welcome to interact, so if there are any questions, please do feel free to participate. Camilla, warmly welcome on stage. Please give a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking to you today about CBD redevelopment and specifically Maboneng, about how Maboneng came about and what some of the challenges were along the way. And I don't know how familiar most of you are with Johannesburg. I think the delegates from the conference are from all over Africa, so I just want to give a bit of context and background on the city. So the Johannesburg CBD used to be a very vibrant and lively CBD, and in the 1990s, businesses and middle-class residents started to move to the suburbs and newer business nodes like Sandton, and the CBD started to decay quite rapidly. And by the early 2000s, what is now known as Maboneng was really a very unpleasant part of the city, characterized by empty warehouses, empty office blocks, dirty, crime-ridden, and really unattractive to residents and investors alike. But as they say, don't waste a good recession, maybe one can also say, don't waste a good decade in a city, because these empty warehouses presented an opportunity, and this opportunity was low-cost infrastructure that could be redeveloped into what is now a very vibrant precinct with loft apartments, some of them worth more than 3 or 4 million rand in those previously decayed office building and warehouses. But how this development came about was really not in a very traditional way, let's say. The founder of Perpetuity had lived abroad in places like London and New York, and he came back to Johannesburg, and there wasn't really anywhere cool that he wanted to live. He didn't really like the kind of very typical Joburg lifestyle of being in a big house behind a big wall or in a complex with a boom. He found that very unnatural, and he essentially built himself a city. So when he saw these empty warehouses in the CBD, what he saw was the next Brooklyn. And the first development that Perpetuity started in 2007 was a set of empty warehouses that are now Arts on Main, which is really the most iconic corner of Maboneng, where we have a very popular Sunday food market where thousands of people come into the precinct every weekend. And over the years, Maboneng has really grown into a community. If you go into the neighborhood now, you'll see a lot of green, public art, There's a lot of restaurants, coffee shops, artisanal bakeries and pizza places and so on. Just to put this growth into some numbers. In 2009, Perpetuity's first development was finished, Arts on Main. And over the next 10 years, they went on to develop almost 60 buildings, which equals more than 200,000 square meters. And what is really unique about what Perpetuity did as really the first mover in that area is that because of the environment that they were operating in, they could never really be a traditional property developer. They planted over 1,000 trees in those 10 years. They upgraded more than 10,000 square meters of sidewalks. And this is really what made the neighborhood what it is, but it also posed a challenge to the developer. If you develop a square meter in a building, you're expecting a certain rental return or sales revenue from the square meter. If you plant a tree, and trees are not cheap, you're getting a very intangible return. So you upgrade a neighborhood and you make an area more attractive, hoping for higher rental returns overall, which also doesn't just benefit your buildings, it benefits the whole area around. But it is a very tricky balance to keep. And this is also something that is probably quite unique to the South African context, because overseas a lot of these public service deliveries like upgrading of sidewalks would be taken over by the government. Despite all this success that Maboneng has achieved over the time, the challenge that has presented itself is how to achieve densification in this neighborhood. And this is something that a lot of the up-and-coming neighborhoods are struggling with. You have a very attractive area with a very diverse population. We've got people in Maboneng, you find everyone there from cleaning lady to CEO. And one thing that is still a challenge for businesses there is foot traffic. Enough foot traffic to attract blue chip tenants, your national supermarkets, and to really make the neighborhood viable. Because if you still have to drive to the next mall to get your weekly grocery shop, the neighborhood isn't really a fully functioning ecosystem yet. And how this can be achieved is through leveraging private sector investment. And Itemba, Atterbury, and Talis have recently formed an urban property fund called Diversity. And Diversity's investment strategy is to focus on predefined precincts and corridors, and one of them is Maboneng. And what they're developing is really large-scale, mixed-income, mixed-use precincts. And this leads me to how to achieve densification in Maboneng. And this is how. So Diversity's immediate development pipeline is over 3,000 residential units to the value of 2 billion rand. Kurum, another property developer in the neighborhood, has 2 developments in their immediate pipeline. Actually, one of them is just finished, worth 65 million and 45 million respectively. Perpetuity has another development worth 55 million. And there's also private developers who are building luxury loft and penthouse apartments worth 40 million rand in the neighborhood. So this is a total of close to 4,000 residential apartments, an investment of over 2.2 billion. And just to illustrate this in a graph, Perpetuity has invested 1 billion rand over 10 years. Diversity is going to invest 2 billion rand over 2 years. So that is double over a fifth of the time. So we are really going to see exponential growth in the neighborhood in the next 2 years. And I'm just going to talk about the actual development that Diversity is gonna do in Maboneng, and it's called Jewel City. They acquired the old Diamond Exchange, and if you look on the map there, it's directly by Maboneng, so it connects directly to Maboneng. And Jewel City are those green blocks, those 6 green blocks, and the scale of this development is such that it's going to double the size of Maboneng in one go. And not just that, if you look to the west, so Fox Street runs through, Fox Street is really the heart of Maboneng. It's the spine that runs through the precinct. And it's going to extend into Jewel City, which is going to be completely pedestrianized, all the way up to the ABSA precinct, which Diversity is also developing. So this is really going to transform the face of the city. And the vision for the precinct is really for people to have a place to live, work, and play. Now we live somewhere, we work somewhere, and, well, we play somewhere in between. But the idea is for all this to be available in your immediate surroundings. And this is a render which really illustrates this vision. So you can see a lot of greenification, public space for people to interact. Jewel City is going to have 2,000 residential apartments, over 30,000 square meters of commercial space, and as a first for the neighborhood, some blue chip tenants. So there's going to be a national supermarket, a pharmacy, a gym, clinic, a school, rooftop soccer park that is available to the community. And it's really going to change the face of Maboneng. If you go there now, it's really a place where you go on the weekend and you have a coffee or you have lunch, you go there for breakfast. But people that live there are still somewhat inconvenienced by not having all amenities close by. And this is something that Jewel City is really going to solve for the neighborhood, as well as providing the necessary scale to make businesses viable. Another challenge that was experienced in Maboneng is that of public space management, or rather poorly managed public space. Urban decay threatens property values and business prosperity. If you can build the most amazing development, but if the neighborhood that it's in is unattractive, people will still not want to live there if the streets look like this. And the solution to this is private sector public space management. So well-managed public spaces increase property values as well as the quality of life for residents. And again, this is something that is a bit more unique to the South African context and Joburg specifically, because what these public space management companies do is putting security and cleaning into place, making areas safe and clean. And again, overseas you would find that the city will collect the garbage and the police will maintain law and order in the public space. And in South Africa, there's often the need to supplement those services in order to make an area attractive. Maboneng spends over 300,000 rand a month on security and cleaning to make the area look the way it looks. So this is a huge factor in the success of these precincts. And the results, as you can see, are attractive public spaces. In Maboneng, you will see a lot of public art by very famous artists. It really makes, well, people love taking selfies there, but it also really makes changes and transforms the neighborhood. And the public gyms, for example, that are there as well, really help people interact in the neighborhood. You see people sitting on the streets and having coffee and having lunch, and it's really transformed the neighborhood into what it is today. And that is really the vision for Maboneng. Brooklyn used to be a crime-ridden, dirty, no-go area where people did not want to live. And then first came the artists and the hipsters, then the investment bankers, and then the families. And now property prices in Brooklyn are on par, if not above, Manhattan's Upper East Side property prices. Shoreditch, the same in London, used to be a decaying inner city area that was kind of taken over by artists and hipsters, and now the rentals are just as expensive as in the rest of London. And what we are saying is, why not Africa? Why not Maboneng? And by the looks of it, we are on our way despite the challenges. Thank you.
Any questions so far on Maboneng? Any questions? We've got two hands in the front of the row. If the roving mic could please make its way.
Thank you. How much effort and resources did you have to mobilize to start the regeneration of Maboneng? I mean, looking at it, that people were now comfortable staying in that condition, so that you would remove them and start the redevelopment that you are doing.
Sorry, it was very clear. You're saying how the efforts to start
Yes.
Maboneng.
Yes, your effort and resources that you had to put in to make sure that you kickstart the redevelopment.
Well, it's the way Maboneng started kind of slowly but surely, and perpetuity was backed by private investors. So there was quite a bit of money that flowed into the area. And so actually the second part of the question was about the future. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I understand. Okay, it's actually an interesting question. So if you look overseas, Maboneng has just won one of the coolest neighborhoods in the world by Forbes magazine. So actually, I think ahead of New York and London. So I think internationally, Maboneng has really got an amazing reputation. If I speak to my friends overseas, they've heard about Maboneng. If they come to Joburg, they want to stay in Maboneng, and we see this also in the uptake of Airbnbs in the neighborhood. There's almost 100 Airbnb apartments with decent occupancy rates. International travelers are attracted to those kind of places. However, in Johannesburg, you find that people are still quite comfortable in their suburbs. So I think that is where it takes changing minds, because they still associate the CBD as an unsafe area where there's a lot of crime and grime. and where they maybe don't want to move. So I think from a South African perspective, there's still some way to go to change this perception of the CBD.
Great question. We've got another question from Tuli in the front.
Thanks. So my question is just around external participation. I mean, I'm not sure the extent in terms of GLA. I mean, regarding Maboneng as a precinct. But it seems as though you've listed all these companies that are already participating, and then I'm just wondering if there's room for anybody else, or has the entire precinct in terms of development and opportunities, are there any left for companies that are not already listed on there? So that's the first part. And the second part is, I think as it stands now, and the picture may look different 5 years down the line, but a lot of the foot traffic that you see there on weekends, it's because of the current structure that you see. Has there been any research that has been done on the impact of now changing from the current state of affairs to now incorporating the residential and all these other development plans that you guys have for the future, how that is going to affect people who are currently going there, given the current state in what you go there to get with the markets, and how that's going to get affected with the plans that you guys have?
Yeah. Okay. So for the first part, I would say that the city is still very big. So there is a lot of development that has happened in a small sort of circle. But if you look around and if you drive into the city and you drive out of the city, there's still a lot of very dilapidated buildings. So I think it can take a couple of tens of thousands of investments, millions of investment more. And the area, the Maboneng core is already quite developed, but the outskirts, there's a long way to go. And with regards to the second part of the question, it's a very good question, and I think it's about what you're essentially saying is how do you keep this balance and how do you not kind of scare off the people that love Maboneng for what it is. And so the developers of diversity are very mindful, I think, of what made Maboneng successful and what Maboneng is. And if you think about it, it's a really great, internationally renowned brand. And now that sort of the first mover, that was perpetuity, has kind of been taken over by the bigger guys like diversity, I think they still see the value of what was originally done and achieved. And they're working together with very renowned PR agencies in how to place this Jewel City precinct. So while it is going to be a more affordable product than what was previously developed in Maboneng, we're talking 1 million rand loft apartments, rentals over 20,000 rand. The average rental in Jewel City is going to be 3,500 rand. So it's more targeted at your young professionals that maybe have just started their job at Absa Bank and as an admin clerk. So it is going to be an interesting balance, but I think one thing that is going to remain is this original core of Maboneng. They're not going to put a KFC there. The blue chip business is going to be on the Jewel City side of things. So it's almost, I think the idea is for both to coexist without one taking over the other. Whether that's going to be successful is to be seen. But yeah.
Any other questions? You can go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I apologize. I missed the beginning of most of your presentation. I didn't realize we were running ahead of time. You've identified Brooklyn, Shoreditch, and Maboneng. Maboneng's in Joburg. Have you looked beyond Joburg and Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, cities like that, and the potential for urban renewal in those cities?
Yes, Cape Town is almost it is the local precedent for.
Sorry, I left Cape Town and Joburg out of it. we know that there's
Okay,
opportunity
so you
there.
mean-
The other cities.
Okay, so you're saying if we've looked at other, if they've looked at other cities for this arena. So Perpetuity actually tried this in Durban. They had operations there, and they were trying to develop this precinct called Rivertown, which is right by the ocean. And similarly to Maboneng, is characterized by a lot of empty warehouses and office blocks. And they kind of ran out of steam there a little bit. So I think there might be potential, but currently there doesn't seem to be the appetite in Durban and those cities. Joburg and Cape Town have done it very, very successfully. I mean, Cape Town even more so than, I think Woodstock in Cape Town is even more widely accepted, and their property prices have done a lot better than Maboneng. But yeah, I'm not aware of similar inner city initiatives across South Africa.
We've got another question. You can go ahead.
Suren Naidu, I'm a freelance journalist. I write for SA Property Insider and Business Day, amongst others. The gentleman kind of took away a part of my question regarding other cities. But the main question to you is, how does the Maboneng plan, or what's been achieved together with diversity, fit into the Herman Mashaba's plans for the city? How does it fit in? Obviously, there's a big drive by them. And I did a story about a month or two ago about potential revamp for Carlton Centre with Transnet moving temporarily out of the city, they say. Just with regards to Durban, are you fully out of Durban? Because I do know that Urban Lime is involved quite extensively in a lot of the projects there, and I think they have over R1 billion worth of projects in Cape Town, which is where they started. So is Perpetuity fully out of Durban? Thanks.
Yeah, so with regards to the first part of the question about how this fits in with Herman Mashaba's agenda, I think it fits in very well. So again, Perpetuity was a first mover in the CBD, and initially there wasn't really a lot of support from the city. Now Herman Mashaba's agenda is to turn the inner city into a construction site. So I think the cities and the private developers' interests are aligned. And I know that there's a lot of communication between the developers and the city and how to work together and make the inner city a success. Herman Mashaba has also just kicked off a program where they are releasing city-owned buildings to the public to redevelop against, so they're making them available for, I think, a lease, so they don't have to actually buy the building. So they're making it very easy and affordable for potential developers to redevelop the stock and create housing in the inner city, because Herman Mashaba also believes that, you know, it's beneficial for people to live close to where they work. If you look at the population, a lot of the working population are living in townships outside of the city, and a third of their salary goes to transport. And this is something that can be quite elegantly solved by providing adequate accommodation in the inner city, which is where a lot of people do work. The second part of the question, as far as I'm aware, Perpetuity has sold I think all of their stock that they were holding in Durban. I know that they used to work together with Urban Line, so that would actually be an example of a developer that is active in the CBD there. But yeah, they've closed the offices there. earlier this year, and have sold the buildings that they own there. Yeah.
Any other questions on Mabone? I think you should all go there if you haven't been there just yet. Quite a vibrant community and, of course, opportunity for you to explore. But if there aren't any further questions, we can give Camilla a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for certainly giving us some insight there. Thank you so much. A big thank you so much to Camilla for sharing more about, of course, the redevelopments within the CBD. And, of course, it certainly speaks to a lot more participation and partnership with local government, with municipalities, and going beyond just expectations that the public sector might actually be able to assist in driving the change that's come about. I'm still, my eyes popped out when you mentioned how much you spend on safety, cleaning and security, which is quite substantial for the area and precinct that it is within Johannesburg. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this does bring us to the end of this particular stream with regard to development and innovation. Unfortunately, our last speaker is not available, so as such, what we strongly encourage you to do is to participate in our Prop Tech stream. That forum is taking place right next door, where the conversation regarding alternative fundraising with technology is currently being discussed. So all these themes regarding cryptocurrencies, if we'll ever get there. Can you imagine putting together a financing deal using cryptocurrencies together with local lease agreements in place? But of course, taking a look at other technologies like blockchain that can certainly assist with regard to property registrations. So what we strongly encourage you to do is to either please join us in the next room for the PropTech Forum. Alternatively, do join us for some networking, and a reminder that cocktails will be taking place at the Grill House in Sandton, ladies and gentlemen. The Grill House in Sandton, that's where the cocktails and networking function to close off this evening's events will be taking place. Because we are ahead of schedule slightly, what we will do, instead of cocktails starting at 5 p.m., they will commence at 4:30. So earlier start to your weekend. I think you can thank the API team for that. On another note, though, as we do conclude and wrap up this particular division, I think it's certainly key to take away many of the considerations that have come through from the conference overall. Of course, partnerships, looking at technology, reanalyzing how we actually allocate capital to a lot of these investments that we plow across the African continent, and of course, adapting and realigning to the realities on the ground. It's not about why you need to do business in Africa, but more about how. Adapt to the environment, understand the nuances, and of course ensure that perhaps you go a little bit smaller, be a lot more focused, and collaborate with key and critical partners that we have present. Another big thank you to all our sponsors as listed on screen, and of course many of the exhibitors. I think the Brawl stand certainly gets a round of applause for that cappuccino that they've been making. Many of you queuing up there. I've been one of them. So again, a big thank you to them for their support. However, the conversations continue, interactions go on, and networking does certainly continue well into the evening this evening. A great pleasure having you all with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please join us next door for the remainder of the Prop Tech Forum, where the conversation is alternative fundraising using technology. Thank you so much.